Hi, everybody. Today we are going to see about the glossopharyngeal nerve, that is ninth cranial nerve. So this is a mixed cranial nerve, and this will have motor fibers, sensory fibers, and parasympathetic fibers. And as we discussed the earlier cranial nerve, we mentioned these cranial nerves 9, 10, 11, 12, along with the vestibular, also is functional components lying in the medulla oblongata. So let us see the uh, fibers, or what are the basic functions with regard to the uh, functional components of the glossopharyngeal nerve. So the glossopharyngeal nerve, the nucleus ambiguous, is the nuclei that we see. But before that, let's see the functional components. So one is the branchiomotor. So that is related to the branchial arch muscle, that is stylopharyngeus muscle. And then comes the secretomotor parasympathetic components, which are supplying to the parotid gland. Then we will see the general sensations that are being carried from the posterior one third of the tongue. And then we have the special sensation of taste coming from the tongue, circumvallate papillae, and the posterior one third. Then we can see the general visceral sensory, that is carrying sensations from the very important receptors of carotid sinus and carotid body. So, which are the nuclei? The nuclei that we will see carrying out these functions, or which we are seeing in the medulla, are the most biggest motor nuclei that we see there is the nucleus ambiguous, which is supplying the bronchiomotor fibers, uh, helping to supply the pharyngeal muscles, most of the pharyngeal muscles. And inferior salivatory nucleus, we see here, as the name suggests, it is responsible for the salivary gland. In this case, it is supplying through the glossopharyngeal nerve into the optic ganglion to the parotid gland. And then we will see the general sensations which are being carried from through the glossopharyngeal nerve, coming to the spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve, which is one of the very longest sensory nuclei that we will see in the brainstem. Then the nucleus of tractus solitarius, that is the special sensation of the tastes, are being carried into this nucleus tractus solitarius. So in this diagram, we can see the locations of these different nuclei. In the red, we see the motor parts. So through the glossopharyngeal, or these glossopharyngeal nerve fibers, we can see here are basically relying to two important motor nuclei. One is this inferior salivatory nuclei that we see here, and the other fibers are coming to this long nucleus ambiguous, which is extending in the upper medulla. So that is the motor part. Coming to the sensory, which we see in the blue, we can see these fibers coming through the glossopharyngeal nerve. They are going, many of these fibers connected to the spinal nucleus of trigeminal. Spinal nucleus of trigeminal, as the name says, is a very long nuclei which we will see from the spinal cord, upper segment spinal cord, medulla. You will see it here in the pons, in the medulla, then into the pons. So that is the spinal nucleus of trigeminal. And then we can see some of the fibers coming into this nucleus tractus solitarius. So this is the nucleus tractus solitarius, which is responsible for the taste sensations. And actually, there is also some of the communication to the vago-accessory complex, or through the vagus. So let us see now the course of this glossopharyngeal. The glossopharyngeal nerve, once it emerges out of the medulla, it emerges out of the medulla through or in between the the olive and the inferior cerebellar peduncle, that is the posterolateral sulcus in the upper part. And then it travels through the posterior cranial fossa for a very short distance before it reaches into the jugular fossa, and it exits the skull through the jugular foramen. And just as it is exiting, we will see there are two ganglia, that is a superior and an inferior ganglia. as it is just coming out of the jugular foramen. And this part we may see traveling in the carotid sheath. So the glossopharyngeal nerve for a very short distance may be seen in the uppermost part of the carotid sheath, along with internal jugular vein and internal carotid artery, most probably in between these two structures, along with the vagus nerve and even the spinal axis in the uppermost part. But then it has to exit the carotid sheath. So there, that is, it passes out between the internal carotid artery and external carotid artery, out of the carotid sheath, passing deep to the styloid process. And then, since it's very intimately related to the styloid process, and then that is where we will see the origin or the rising of the stylopharyngeus muscle. So from then, it's got this companion that is the stylopharyngeus muscle, and it comes together. Muscle and the nerve travels together, and we will see it when we study the constrictors that it is passing between. And as it enters the pharynx, we will see it winding around the lower border of the stylopharyngeus muscle, and then one part of the nerve or the passes to the tongue, and that is passing deep to the hyoglossus and then into the substance of the tongue. So that is to the posterior one third of the tongue, whereas the other part is going to the pharynx, as I just told you, between the superior and middle constrictors along with the stylopharyngeus muscle, it passes into the pharynx. So that is like the, so this part is the one which comes to the pharynx. So that is, whereas the part which goes to the tongue is going deep to the hyoglossus muscle that we see here. So the hyoglossus muscle. So this is the major part of the course that we see with regard to the glossopharyngeal nerve. And once again, here is showing the secretomotor. Now, this is the parasympathetic fibers which are coming from the inferior salivatory nucleus in the medulla. So from there, you will see it coming through the glossopharyngeal nerve, passing through these ganglions. Then we have seen it was entering into the through the Jacobson's nerve or into the tympanic plexus. And from the tympanic plexus, we will see it coming out of the ear as the lesser petrosal nerve. And this lesser petrosal nerve carries the parasympathetic signals to relay in the otic ganglion, which is lying on the trunk of the mandibular nerve. And from the otic ganglion, we know the postganglionic fibers are passing through the auriculotemporal nerve into the parotid gland. So that is how the secretomotor fibers are reaching to the parotid gland from the or through the glossopharyngeal initially, and then of course it synapses in the otic ganglion thereafter through the mandibular. So next we have to see is the branches. So since this is a very widely distributed nerve, we can say in the head and the neck with regard to several structures, we have a lot of branches. So tympanic branch, the branch which enters the ear or the middle ear, we can see it forming a plexus. In fact, the glossopharyngeal nerve is the main contributor to the tympanic plexus, which is lying on the promontory of the medial wall of the middle ear. And then the carotid branch, as we just said, a very important a general sensation that is taking sensation from the baroreceptors and the chemoreceptors from the carotid body and the carotid sinus, which is lying at the bifurcation of the common carotid artery. So that is the carotid branch, which is carrying these general sensations from these receptors. And then we have the pharyngeal branches, as I said, which is helping to form the pharyngeal plexus, along with contributions coming from the vagus nerve as well, or the vagoaxillary complex. These pharyngeal branches are very important to supply these pharyngeal muscles and some muscles of the palate. Then the branchiomotor fiber that is coming from the pharyngeal arch, that is exclusively for the stylopharyngeus, the longitudinal muscle of the pharynx. Then we have the tonsillar branch, which is sensory and carrying to the palatine tonsil, um, lying in the oropharynx. Then the along with that or very close to that, passing deep to the hyoglossus, is the lingual branches. So the lingual branch, as the name suggests, is of course coming to the tongue. It takes sensations from the circumvalent papillae and from the posterior one third of the tongue. So these are the ones which carries the taste sensations as well as the general sensations from the tongue. And furthermore, we can see there are communications from the glossopharyngeal uh, or from the inferior ganglion of the glossopharyngeal into two parts. One is to the superior cervical sympathetic ganglion. Other is to the vagoaccessory complex through the ganglia of the 10th cranial nerve or the vagoaccessory complex. So therefore, we will see that the vagoaccessory complex, and when we see the applied uh, it is kind of rare to see glossopharyngeal nerve injury exclusively because most of the time it is accompanied with the vagus nerve also because of these communications. And we will say that these injury or any injury to the glossopharyngeal nerve, we lose the taste sensations from the posterior one third because circumvalent papillae is where you have the maximum number of taste buds, and so that sensation of taste is carried through the glossopharyngeal nerve fibers. The sensation coming from the soft palate, so that is also some of it is general, some of it is taste. So these are also being lost. As I just mentioned, the ninth nerve lesions are kind of rare by itself, usually accompanied with the vagus, the vagoaccessory complex, and all that. So that is important. Another important aspect is the gag reflex. The gag reflex is basically carried by the glossopharyngeal nerve. So that is, we know the soft palate. When we touch the soft palate, the pharynx, the sensory signals are being carried through this glossopharyngeal nerve and into the caudal nucleus or the spinal nucleus of the trigeminal, which is therefore thereafter projecting bilaterally to the nucleus ambiguous. So that is the till the spinal nucleus of trigeminal is the sensory limb, and then from the spinal nucleus of trigeminal, it projects to the nucleus ambiguous, which is lying in the medulla, which is the motor limb. So from there, the the response is carried out through the nucleus ambiguous fibers coming to the palate muscles and the pharyngeal muscles, as we just mentioned, coming through the pharyngeal plexus. And so the direct response comes from the same side of the stimulation, whereas there is a consensual response which is on the side opposite to the stimulus. So the gag reflex is most more or less exclusively related to the glossopharyngeal nerve, both sensory limb as well as the motor limb, as we just saw, because both are being carried through the glossopharyngeal being a mixed nerve. So that is one important applied aspect with regard to the glossopharyngeal, the gag reflex. So the soft palate, the sensations from the soft palate and the pharynx passing through the superior ganglion and the glossopharyngeal nerve. You can see it comes to the spinal nucleus of the spinal tract of the trigeminal, and from there it is then projected to the nucleus ambiguous. So the nucleus ambiguous, as we see here, is connecting bilaterally, and from the nucleus ambiguous, as we just saw in the earlier slides, the nucleus ambiguous carries motor fibers to the pharyngeal muscles and through the pharyngeal plexus. And so that gives the gag reflex or the response. Um, to summarize the glossopharyngeal nerve, the functional components we know are, since it's a mixed nerve, we have both efferent and afferent. The efferent ones are the special visceral efferent and the general visceral efferent. The special visceral efferent, the nucleus or the functional component or the nuclei is lying in the medulla, that is the nucleus ambiguous, it is the branchiomotor. So these fibers are basically to supply the muscle that is developed from the pharyngeal arch, that is the stylopharyngeus muscle, exclusive longitudinal muscle of the pharynx. When we study the nerve supply of the pharynx, we say very specifically all the muscles of the pharynx except the stylopharyngeus is being supplied from the pharyngeal plexus. So the stylopharyngeus is in fact coming from the glossopharyngeal nerve exclusively. Then this muscle helps to elevate the larynx. The general visceral efferent, that is secretomotor, parasympathetic. It comes from the inferior salivatory nucleus, which is lying in the medulla. Through, of course, the same. It all emerges through a single glossopharyngeal nerve, and then we saw its pathway where it relays in the aortic ganglion, reaches to the parotid gland. Then the sensory, as we said, carries both general sensation and special sensation. The special visceral afferent is that which is carrying the taste. So therefore, the gustatory nucleus, um, which is responsible for interpreting or a very important nuclei for taste. So that will take sensation on the circumvallate papillae and the posterior one third of the tongue, and that is for the taste sensation. The general sensations from the pharynx as well as the posterior one third of the tongue, they are being carried through the nucleus tractus solitarius, and very important. I would say more general sensation fibers are coming from this carotid body and carotid sinus. Of course, there are general sensation from the tongue, posterior one third also, and the pharynx. So this is what I said is carrying the sensory fibers or the afferent limb of the gag reflex coming from this posterior one third of the tongue, the palate, the soft palate, the mass. So that carries that general sensation, and then that is connected to the nucleus ambiguous or projecting bilaterally the nucleus ambiguous and resulting in the gag reflex. So that is what we can see here. So this is the summary of the glossopharyngeal nerve. Uh, it is kind of a very important cranial nerve in the head and neck because it carries important sensations of taste as well as important motor supply to the pharyngeal muscles through the pharyngeal plexus and the stylopharyngeus. Then secretomotor to the salivary, the largest salivary gland as the parotid gland. So because of all this, the glossopharyngeal nerve is a very important nerve, I would say. And I hope you have understood the basic functions of this nerve and the origin, the functional components, the nuclei, the course from the jugular foramen till it reaches to the tongue and the pharynx. And of course, we saw about its distribution through the different branches, a lot of branches because of its very wide distribution. So, thank you for listening and hope you've got a good understanding about the glossopharyngeal. Thank you.